Hello and welcome to today's review, but before we get started with the video, just a very quick disclaimer. This is a hardware review. We are looking at the hardware of this, the TS-453E, and although I will be doing software reviews on this and I will be doing a Plex Media Server test as well as comparing it against a number of different NASs right now that are all trying to vie for your money and your data, there won't be a lot of software in this. I'll refer to it, I might put some QTS5 stuff on screen, and I will talk about some standout features that are runnable on this, but this is a hardware review. We're looking at the system, its hardware, taking it apart, taking a good long look at it. So if you're looking for the software, it'll come in a few days, maybe within the week, but otherwise roll those beginning credits. That's right, today we're hardware reviewing the TS-453E from QNAP, a very, I would argue, unconventional NAS. And by unconventional, that's a hell of a way to start a video, isn't it? Well, unconventional because over the years I've reviewed a lot of NAS, and dare I say, if you're watching this, whether it is the first NAS you are buying or you're upgrading an old one, you may have noticed something of a pattern. And by that I mean, when we see all the NASs that these brands are releasing, and this applies to a lot of different areas of technology you find out there, once a brand really sets its roots in and starts diversifying its portfolio, what you find is that their portfolio starts to have tiers, as little areas within the tier which kind of go along the line of crazy too cheap to be good. Then you get your cost effective, you get your value, you get your budget, you get your SMB, you get your consumer, your SMB, your prosumer, your enterprise, and it goes along. And products tend to live within those brackets. The hardware architecture they put inside is based on what they can sell it for and the value, and still maintain a profit margin. Hence why when people look at, say, £100 NAS and go, why hasn't it got 10 GBE? I would sit there and go, well, of course not. What do you expect for 100 notes? So within those portfolios and those guidelines and those little tiers, we are used to, over the years, solutions arriving within them with small overlaps. Often, as hardware becomes more efficient and more technology arrives, what you get for those individual tiers does improve. And what you find is that one product that lives within a tier, such as the prosumer tier, such as the DS920 and the TS464, you find with those that what you get for your money improves every few years, but the rest of the portfolio moves organically as well, and the price generally stays the same, but as advances in technology improve, things get better. Now, why have I spent and wasted the first minute, 2 minutes of your time on this video talking about that? Well, nice and simple, this thing breaks a lot of those conventions. It manages to cover about 3 different tiers at once. And dare I say it, QNAP could potentially be screwing their own portfolio to pieces by releasing it, because it is arriving with an option at its price point and its architecture as a viable alternative to solutions they have released within the last 12 months or so, maybe a year and a half, and make people think, why on earth would I choose one of these other 3 solutions when their best qualities are in this one? And that's really the interesting thing about this device. It is quite groundbreaking within the context of NAS, and it kind of undermines a lot of what brands are producing for for a specific price point. But that is enough of that. Let's unbox this device here. Now, the TS-453E knocks around for about $639. That's the only kind of sturdy price that I found online at the time of recording this review, and that's on Amazon.com. There'll be links in the description. I'm sure as time wears on and availability arrives, we'll start seeing price points for the UK scene, and of course Germany, France, Australia, Canada, all the rest of the world. But right now, the only kind of trackable commercial grade pricing I could find was that $639 mark. Now, that means at that price point, it is challenging the likes of the 2.5 to 3 years older TS-453D, which is knocking around for about $500 to $600 on special offer. So again, this is arriving more expensive than that, but than the new generation, and the old gen largely on clearance now with 10 to 20% off a number of outlets. But when you look at the price tag of things like the TS-451D2, the price tag of the TS-464 that is now slowly becoming more available, you find this $639 price, even if that's peak and that's RRP with flexibility, it's kind of spreading itself across the price of the more Intel based, but still price spectrum of QNAP's 4-bay releases that are Intel and graphic enabled with a Celeron powered processor inside. Now, where it really arrives, it's supposed to be architecturally and profile wise, from what I've understood from speaking with QNAP, this is designed to be a replacement to the fantastically old TS-451 Plus that you can still buy new. That was released in like 2015-16, that system. That was one of the original quad-core Celeron 2 to 8 gig kind of multimedia NASs from the brand. It arrived with a remote control, it arrived at a not dissimilar price point to this, and that NAS has been around for a horrendous amount of time and still sells because it is a box ticker NAS. It's good for multimedia, it is dual LAN, it has USB 3, it has remote control, it will do media, it will do all of the features of QNAP's platform, and is still regularly receiving software updates to this day. So this is designed to replace the 451 Plus. But I'll stop giving it all that. I've really been a banging talking intro, innit? Let's talk about what you get for your money in the unboxing. The retail box is fairly standard. It's quite synonymous with QNAP here in their range here. Again, brown box design, big old label on the front that denotes some of the contents there. Inside, a lovely bit of protection there in transit. These systems that are built in Taiwan are sent all around the world. Again, the effects, even though these are sent unpopulated, you can't buy it, at least from QNAP pre-populated with storage media. It does, they're sent without drives inside, and therefore silent damage like shock damage, motion damage, and the kind of damage that you won't really know about for a year or two with cracks on the backboard or transistors being loosened or anything like that, you won't know for a few years. So it's good that because these are silent threats to damage, that systems like this, despite being a lot more cost efficient and being a lot more petite, are still very well protected in transit. That's an area where a number of brands that I've talked about in the past, not just in NAS, have cut corners to save the old lolly there. Either it is to produce a product at a lower price or just make a bit more money. But again, the consumer may lose out on that. But that's nice that's in there. You've got your mains lead. You've got a giant bit of hard foam there. Always lovely to see. We have our accessories box. And again, I should add, I might be about to name my first negative. I've not looked inside this, so I don't know what to expect. But there's one thing I am looking for inside this box that will become clear in just a moment if it's in there or not. So let's have a look. What we've got is our external 90-watt PSU. And again, 3-pin kettle-type plug there going into a single-pin connector there on the device. We have got our keys. Inside in here we have a collection of keys for the individual 4 SATA storage bays there for 2.5-inch and 3.5-inch media. We've also got screws for 2.5-inch and 3.5-inch media, although this should use click and load trays, and therefore 3.5-inch drive media should go straight in without a screwdriver. It's worth highlighting this system arrived with support of all the way up to 20 TB and 22 TB drives currently in 2022. So again, lovely stuff there. There's no, kind of limited drive compatibility. You've got carte blanche, Toshiba, Seagate, WD. They're all there for you. And we have screws there for our internal M2 NVMe slots. That's right, this has 2 additional SSD bays inside that can be utilized for caching. They can be utilized with QNAP's Q-tier system that creates a whole storage pool that is a combination hard drive and SSD and then intelligently moves data that's more frequently accessed onto the SSD. So unlike caching that creates copies or uses write caching where it moves onto the SSD and then onto the hard drives, Q-tier combines all the storage and actually moves the data, not clones it. And finally, you can use those M2 SSD slots with modern generation PCIe SSDs to create standalone storage pools for more fast-acting areas of storage. So that could be for the OS or prime files. It could be for databases. It could be for Plex, although the benefit would be negligible for virtual machines and more. All of that with those SSDs. And those screws are there to attach those drives into the available slots. And it looks like the thing I was looking for isn't here, so strap in for my first negative. But before we get there, details on the extended warranty. The system arrives with 3 years of warranty, which I really like. That can be extended to 5 years for an additional sum, and it details on your all-inclusive warranty and your first use quick start guide, I should say. I've lost the ability to speak there. And on top of that, we have a 1.8 meter Cat5e cable for the network ports there, which is more than sufficient. This system does have 2 ports on the rear, but again, for reasons of waste, and I think maybe the low uptake of 2.5 gigabit Ethernet over 1 GBE, or as well as utilization of link aggregation by compared with standard 1 port connectors there. I've got to say I'm happy with that. I'm not going to critique it for not being Cat6. But what's missing in this box that I'm already kind of not happy about is a lack of heat sinks. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, when it comes to utilizing SSDs inside these systems, particularly for those using them for caching, these SSDs get real hot. Gen 3, Gen 4, they get hot. And when they do that, you need to dissipate that heat as much as possible. This system doesn't utilize, apart from a single 120mm fan that you have control over, the rest of the system remains cool via the utilization of heat sinks that we're going to look at later on. And some of QNAP systems that arrive with support of M2 NVMEs have small adhesive heat sinks that you can attach to the SSD. They can be full length or just small ones that you directly attach onto the controller of the SSD. With those SSDs, the NAND, where the actual data is, that can get a bit warm. That's fine. They actually work a bit better when they get a bit warm. But the controller, the CPU, if you will, of that SSD doesn't like getting hot. And once it exceeds 70 degrees, it can start to throttle or bottleneck the performance of the SSD in order to maintain performance and its lifespan. So having heat sinks on these are very, very important. Now, maybe there isn't a tremendous amount of space inside, but you can get low profile heat sinks. Maybe they've thought people might not use them for caching. That's fine. But it really annoys me that in some of the more pricey QNAP solutions, such as the 72XT and the 73A series, those systems that also arrive in 4 bays have those heat sinks. This not having it sort of annoys me because they're not expensive. They are, we're talking pence, we're talking cents. We are not talking a lot of money. And the fact this system doesn't include them kind of annoys me a bit. It's a small thing. It's not for everyone. And I'd almost not critique them for it if every QNAP never arrived with them. But it's the fact that some of their desktop solutions do, and the ones that do cost more and are metal chassis. This is a plastic chassis, and it's a compact one at that, much smaller. So heat sinks for me are more important in this solution, and the fact they're not there kind of bugs me a bit, you know. So carrying on, all we've got left to look at now is our NAS, which I picked up in the most inefficient way. We don't need that bag. And here is our NAS. Inside there, another big old bit of foam there at the bottom. Let's get the thumbnail sorted, shall we? Thank you for bearing with me there. So, that is the chassis of the TS-453E. Now, the first thing that might strike you, and I think it will become a little bit more apparent if we bring this bad boy down, is we can see that it is utilizing a different chassis to the more recent releases from QNAP in the TS-462 and the TS-464. Now, this chassis, it's modified, has to be said. It has slight tweaks on a design, but it's still a design that's been around now for a long time. This is more often utilized in their more affordable systems. Hell, it is incredibly comparable to that of the TS-451 Plus that it is replacing in the portfolio. There's additional ventilation there on the top, ventilation on either side, it has to be said, an improvement in ports, connections and more, but it's still the same chassis. And even though it's in black and that kind of matte plastic around there with a shiny side panel there, I'm still not completely in love with this chassis. It's not like it's going to be on your desk most of the time. It's not designed to be looked at. It's designed to be set up and forgotten. But still, nonetheless, it's not a great looking chassis. And I kind of wish they'd gone more uniform like the likes of Drobo, or dare I say it, Synology, and had a single chassis that they utilised for the entire range, with maybe colour spectrum changes between them there. It is a pinch shallower than that other chassis there, but in terms of overall shape, it's largely the same. So I don't think they would have had difficulty getting in those components. It is worth highlighting that the placement of the ports and connections differ, so where the board inside exists does change, but I do think that's more a case of them conforming to an existing design choice and architecture than it is because it has to be that way. And I think QNAP could stand to do very well if they had that single chassis design throughout their portfolio with that small colour difference there on the front. That sense of uniformity, that sense of brand identity would work well for them. And again, it is something the likes of Drobo, the likes of WD, the likes of even Acer Store have done to a larger degree, and something I kind of wish that QNAP would adopt more and more in their solutions. Plus, not tremendously in love with this chassis. I think it's still a little dated, and it's probably the second thing in this video that I'm not overly keen on. But I have to say, spoiler alert, for the most part, I bloody love this device, but we'll get on to why in a bit. So before we talk about some of the physicalities of the ports and connections and internal hardware, let's take a good long look at it there up close. Now, when we look at this, we can see first and foremost, as mentioned, all of that ventilation at the top. At the top here is where we find those M2 NVMEs. I'm going to remove the back of this NAS on later on and show you. At the top, we have a strip vent there to pull air, and there is space between every one of the SATA storage bays to assist alongside that rear fan there, that 120mm fan there. In terms of noise, we will be looking at the noise of this operation in a video soon when we do our noise test video series. So don't worry, that will be coming soon. I'm going to make sure we populate it with different drives in that video to test the audible levels on it. But I've used this chassis before in other variants, and it's not a noisy chassis. If you use bigger drives, 8 TB and above, or enterprise grade or pro tier drives, then it will make some racket. But if this is anything like the other chassis that I've used, it's actually quite low noise. If we have a look on the side there, let's remove that bit of plastic, because we really don't want that there. We can see another thing that I bloody love, and that's that USB port. Now, if you've been following this channel for a while, which, and again, I'm grateful, but that'd be weird because this is hardly cut, you know, this isn't everyday stuff. But if you've been following this channel, you'll know that I will always love a NAS that has a front mounted USB port and button. It's incredibly prosaic. It is not exactly cutting edge, but this port here means that your system, when you're putting all your data inside, and you can back up to the cloud if you choose, you can back up to another NAS, there's backup folder to folder, you've got snapshots, you've got all kind of different WRM and support like that. But what this does have is that ability to just chuck in a USB drive, set up via the USB software your backup routine, so USB to NAS or NAS to USB, certain folders, certain file types, different rules and filters for different file formats, file sizes, dates and more, as well as differential backups too, so you can do one big backup and then afterwards every time you click it, it only backs up the files that have changed. But you can do all of that by touching a button and then it runs it. Now, yes, you don't need to use the USB port there, the button. If you want, you can set it up so as soon as you connect a pre-selected USB, so if you connected, say, a SanDisk here, this is my SanDisk video backup drive, if I connected that there, then what would happen is I could do it so it automatically sees that drive and constitutes the backup immediately. You can leave a USB connected and have a scheduled backup, which is a little less safe. But I like the idea, much like anyone that plays computer games that has an inherent distrust for auto-save and will always manual save, having that button there is a little bit of extra peace of mind that I know that I can click it and actually see the backup take place. There's even an LED specifically dedicated to backups in operation on this device there. There's LEDs for system and network operation and all the individual drives and the M2s. but the fact that there's a specific LED that shows when backups are happening, I really like. And of course, let's end on the finish, which is that it's a USB 3.2 Gen 2 port. That means 1000 megabytes per second transmission, which means much faster backups there on that port. And at the moment, only Asus Store and QNAP are the ones with USB copy buttons on their systems that are 1000 megs there, which means if you do use an external SSD like this one, this is M2 based, I'm going to get 1000 megs out of it straight away, which again, for backups, lovely stuff. That's the equivalent of a 10 GBE port localized. Now, if we look at the drive trays, we can see they are plastic click and load. We've got screw holes there on the base there for our 2.5-inch drive media there. And again, putting the drive inside is very straightforward. I'm just going to grab a drive. So we got this is our WD Red Plus, a 4 TB. But again, do bear in mind, once as mentioned, if you exceed 8 TB, you're going to get noisier drives. So bear that in mind. Slot the drive inside there. You can feel it click into the grooves. Again, put the SATA port out. Get your tray handles there. Put them on the side. 1, 2. It's that straightforward to get the drive and then just slot it straight into the system. Done. Simple as that. And each of those bays can be locked. And again, that's not like a hugely enterprise lock there. It's going to be very easy to break for those that want to. It is not designed, that lock, to just keep people out and stealing it. It is designed to stop people accidentally removing the drive during hot swaps or drive replacements unnecessarily, or just in error. But bear in mind that you can run the system to be fully encrypted internally, and with that encryption you can make sure that even if someone did take that drive out or all the drives out, that they're still going to be useless to them without the appropriate credentials and encryption key. So if we remove all of those drive trays, all 4 of them, and again bear in mind this system only supports, as mentioned, 20 and 22 TB drives, but you can run it on just a single drive if you choose and start adding drives later. If we have a look inside, you can see a lovely clean setup there. There's our SATA base there on the back, no loose wires. The fan directly behind there. On the side, you can see that side panel there. And what you may notice, and we'll come to it later on when I remove the chassis casing, but this is normally where you would see the memory. You'd see a lovely little sewed in memory in a slot there. And again, this system, when we talk about the internal hardware, do bear that in mind, because that comes down to my third thing I'm not overly keen on this device overall. But that's really kind of the design choice there for those, with the ventilation there on the base, and as mentioned, ventilation there on the sides. There's loads of photos and close-ups and stuff on the review linked in the description below over on NAS Compares. But if we look at the rear of this device, we can have a little look at those ports and connections. Now, let's start with what I like. Boom, these bad boys here. Now, those are 2.5 gigabit Ethernet ports. There are 2 of them, I might add, and of course with support of link aggregation. That means that you can run this system with each port on its own for up to 270 megabytes per second on each of those, or you can combine them via link aggregation or port trunking if you have a supported switch, to then add another potential 570 to 508, I think it's 572 megabytes per second potential through that. I think that's what the 2 times 2.5 GBE max performance that we've seen there in the past, or just 2.5G or 5G, but it calculates into megabytes there. Now, yes, 2.5 GBE is still nowhere near as ubiquitous as 1 GBE in the market. However, if you are going to buy something that you plan to use for several years, and remember, this is replacing a NAS, a 451 Plus, that arrived in 2015-16, then maybe you want something where you can max up your bandwidth down the line. You can get yourself adapters. You can now get USB to 2.5 GBE adapters that are supported on Mac, Windows, Linux, even Android, that are as little as 20 or 30 quid, which will allow you to create connections with this device at 250 to 270 megs and not 100 to 109 megs of simple 1 GBE. And that future proofing is key. And the idea that you buy these systems at the same price as 1 GBE, that's the other crucial point when people say, why get 2.5 GBE? 2.5 GBE is nowhere, it's a fad. And I get that. I can see your point of view, but look at it from the other point of view, which is if 2.5 GBE is costing the same as 1 GBE to develop, get 2.5 GBE, get 2.5 times the bandwidth for future-proofing's sake, because you don't know how much the rest of your architecture is going to change down the line. Indeed, this system not only supports 2.5 GBE as standard and the ability to add 2.5 GBE to your systems and direct connect, but on top of that, you can utilize things like this. This is a 50 to 60 quid QNAP USB to 5 gigabit Ethernet adapter. You can add 5 gigabit Ethernet to this system. So again, combined with those ports and this, that's a potential 10 gigabit Ethernet potential on this. Now, trunking them, I don't think is supported. You would have 2.5 GBE twice that you can lag, and this separate. I do not think you could lag them together, and I certainly wouldn't recommend it, given it is a external device. But still, the ability to add that, and remember that is supported again, Windows, Mac, Linux, Android. It's great to have that flexibility in your network connectivity. Now, moving down from that, we can go for the more pedestrian ports. We have another USB 3.2 Gen 2 port there, so another 10 gig port. Again, supporting external USB drives, KVM devices, but we'll get onto that in a bit. It has support of the USB adapters, as mentioned there, for increased network ports there. There is GitHub development, but nowhere near complete, of utilizing Wi-Fi 6 dongles, such as the D-Link AX1800 USB to Wi-Fi 6 dongle there, and other peripheral devices as well, even the digital TV tuners, and there's obviously printers and scanners and UPSs and stuff like that. But alongside that, we have a couple of USB 2 ports there, which is super boring. Those ports, I have to say, I still have their use in this, and normally I would rag on a system for including USB 2 because I think it's a bit cheaped out, depending on the PCI makeup and available lanes in that chipset. But I would say, in the case of this, as a KVM, in conjunction with our HDMI ports, I'm prepared to let it slide a little bit, because these HDMI ports will allow you to create that keyboard video mouse setup for the likes of surveillance. You can have a standalone surveillance system with your keyboard, your mouse, your multiple cameras dotted around your home or business environment, and a monitor connected to this device, as well as accessing it via the mobile app and via the network or the desktop tools. And indeed, not only can you attach multiple cameras like this, the Rio Link Dome that we've talked about and reviewed before, but on top of that, this system has 8 camera licenses included with that software, and it is an enterprise grade surveillance software, and given the hardware architecture of this, you can really make the most of this very compact NAS towards surveillance. And as well, you can run a virtual machine on this, several of them, or run a Ubuntu, I think version 20 or 21 right now, on Linux Station within this system. There's 2 clicks, download to the VM, and you can deploy it in the system, KVM or remote access. Same goes for Microsoft VMs that you can download in 3 clicks and deploy in this system. Again, KVM for a keyboard video mouse connection, or connect it to it remotely via applications. Again, the one thing I will say against it though, you may have noticed there are 2 ports, 2 HDMI ports there. First and foremost, those HDMIs are 1.4B, which means that 1080p, 60 frames sorted, but 4K limited to 30 frames. Next thing, those HDMI ports, the second one can't be used independently or parallel, which is a real shame when you look at that the system arrives with a standalone parallel fully featured GUI on the HDMI port there, known as HD Station or Hybrid Desk Station, that allows you to install multiple apps that run parallel to the rest of the QNAP's other storage services and QTS. That software isn't updated anywhere near as much as it should, but it's still got a great number of applications, as well as third-party applications from QNAP Club that involve latest generation of Plex via HDMI. Kodi, latest versions of Kodi there. Lots of games that you can install. Some real PC classics, Command & Conquer, Doom. It can be installed on this. Then there's lots of emulation tools like LibreArch and RetroArch, it has to be said. So I like the HDMI output, but I don't like that I can't run separate instances of HD Station to dedicated ports. You can only use the second port as an extended desktop for the first port, or to mirror it, which is a bit who cares. And that's really it for the ports and connections on there. Lovely little setup there in terms of connectivity on this device. I'm really pleased with it. So let's grab our screwdriver now and start making our way inside this device and then have a little look at those internal components, because that's another area on this device that is mostly good. Mostly. But I do have one little quibble which of all of my complaints is actually a little bit tenuous, if I am honest, given the price point that this system is arriving with. So what you need to do is slowly remove all of there's 4 screws on the rear of this device. And again, this is a plastic chassis. Do not do this when the system is in operation. That would be beyond stupid. And what you do is you remove those 4 screws, and from there it will allow you to basically take the chassis into 2 pieces there, and then access the internals. Let's have a little look. Let's get that out of there. Slide it that way. Again, so you're sliding from the back, and then the top of the chassis comes off. It's completely plastic inside there. That's the bulk of the main half of that chassis. Let's keep that there. Now we can have a little look inside this device. Now, you've already seen it earlier on. Those were our SATA connections. They're on the rear of the device. On the bottom there, you can see the base of that fan. There's loads of ventilation space. And there at the top, we've got our 2 M2 connectors, as well as the screws that keep those in place. Sorry about that. So the first thing that strikes me is you could definitely get heat sinks in there. If you put an SSD inside that top slot, you've got room to put your thermal pad. You've definitely got room to put a heatsink on there. So again, QNAP, where is my heatsink? But these 2 M2 slots inside, as mentioned, can be utilised for storage, caching and Q-tier. Sorry about that, massive coughing fit just then. Yes, you can utilise those for Q-tier, for caching and raw storage, but it's worth highlighting that due to the chipset inside and trying to include as many features and services as possible, that those ports are PCIe Gen 3 × 2, which is a bit of a shame really. I know that more modern generation or Gen 3 SSDs in the market right now, they give you support of around 3200 to 3400 megabytes per second, but remember each of these, because of Gen 3 × 2 architecture, is going to cap those at 2000 megs each. It's still a great amount of storage there, but still, there's no avoiding that you are going to be limited there to 2000 megs on each of those. Now, inside, you can make out a couple of things. I'm going to bring it as close as I can. You can see a large black heatsink there at the back. And again, there will be much better photos in the article below. That heatsink is what has that CPU that's inside. So, the CPU in this, it was the thing more than any other element about this NAS. When I first learned about it, I went, ooh, intriguing. And that's because it is an Intel Celeron. It is a J6125. So it is a newer generation Celeron than the one that's inside the TS-464, their premium prosumer CPU NAS there. Now that CPU is a quad-core 2.0 GHz CPU that can be burst up to 2.6 GHz, and it arrives with embedded graphics on board. 400 MHz that can be clocked up to 800 MHz of the GPU element there. Now that CPU that arrived on the scene in Q3 of 2021 has a pretty decent score on CPU benchmark of 3,930. Yes, I looked at my notes. Now, why am I banging on about all this? Well, once again, because the CPU inside this device, which is the N5105, although there were variations due to chip shortages, it's predominantly now the N5105, that CPU is only a little better. Not loads, it's definitely better. It scores higher at 4,116 on CPU benchmark there, so less than 200 points higher. But the CPU has a slightly larger CPU clock speed on burst. It has slightly higher frequency of graphics, I think 450 to 850, but again, we will of course be doing a comparison with these soon. And overall, that CPU is just a little better, and that's what I meant at the start of this video about the portfolio. We're used to QNAP releasing a low-powered quad-core Intel, that was the 451 Plus, a more powerful dual-core, which was the TS-451D2, which is soon to be replaced by the TS-462, and then at the top it would be the more powerful quad-core Intel Celeron, which was that, the N5105. But this seems to be closer to this than it is to the other two more mid-range, mid-quality, mid-business, mid-consumer Intel 4 bays. Overall, this seems to be of a higher power point and capability than both the 462 and the 451D2 there, and it's really messed with the portfolio because a lot of the other NASs have advantages. They can have things added to them with PCIe slots, which this doesn't have. They can arrive with memory expandability, and I'll touch on that in a bit. They can arrive with different features that this doesn't have, but they are all features that you might not use. This has 3 years of warranty, those others have 2. So this borrows that powerful CPU, it borrows 2.5 GBE, it borrows M2 NVMe SSD slots, but manages to kind of mess up the whole portfolio, because a lot of users, they're going to look at that range of solutions and will go, well, this thing's just doing all the stuff without me spending extra for stuff I may not use. And that's what I mean about the way it changes up the portfolio. However, that CPU is combined with something that will split opinion, and that's the memory. I said I'd get onto it, and here I am. This system arrives with 8 gig of DDR4 memory, and before you go, yeah, I'll have another beer, which would be weird, because this isn't really a beer kind of video, forgive me, I will say that as good as having 8 gig of memory by default, which means better VMs, which means better surveillance camera support, which means better containers, which means better for multimedia, better for 4K, better for the AI supported services in QMAGI and all of the rest of the multimedia lineup. I will say that the fact that you cannot upgrade that memory is a bit of a pain. If you look back when I showed you that slot, you can see those little modules there. They are DDR4 modules, and in the review below, hopefully I've taken close-ups and then researched each of the individual model parts, but I'm willing to bet these are between 2400 and 3200 megahertz modules there, and there are 4 individual 1 gig DDR4, 2 gig DDR4 modules. That is the 8 gig this arrives with, so you can't upgrade that. So the reason I talk about that as a neg is because, one, some users might not want 8 gig of memory, because you generally find, much like this, which arrives in 4 gig, 8 gig and 16 gig versions, that you're paying extra for that memory. Of course you are. And some people don't like to spend extra on the memory not knowing if they're going to use it. They'd rather go for a system that's got 2 and 4 gig by default, and then later on, if they need it in terms of future proofing and long term as things get busier, then they can add it with a module. This fixes you with 8 gig. You have to pay for 8 gig on day dot, and you can't add more later either, which is particularly galling when you know that that CPU over 4 lanes supports up to 32 gig overall. So again, that means you're not even using that CPU's full capability in terms of memory. It's still a great amount of memory for starting. I'm glad they didn't fix it at 4, but still 8 gig might be too much for some that were looking for a better price point, and it might be slightly capped for those that were hoping to upgrade, like this system that can reach 16 gig of memory and arrives with 4. Now, flexibility in pricing and longevity and long-term upgradability may be more appealing. So apart from that, I really like the internal hardware architecture of this. I wish those slots at the top were a higher bandwidth, but I understand the reasons for that. I wish I could upgrade the memory, but I understand that at least they give me 8 gig by default, and I love that CPU overall, and I can't really say a negative about it, given it how close it is in terms of the system price point and the architecture to that of the 464, but still arriving at a lower price. I wish it had the upgradable PCIe slot for more modern releases, but I understand again the reason why it doesn't have that, because it's kind of trimming features to keep within that price point there. And I think in terms of its performance in QTS 5, of course there isn't going to be support of the ZFS platform QUTS due to its much higher lower minimum, I should say, a much higher minimum resource utilization there. But in terms of what it supports in the QTS 5 catalogue of applications, the works. You can support up to 32 cameras simultaneously in full utilization there, and again 8 camera licenses included. You can run 2 to 4 VMs quite easily. You can run a lot of containers on this system. You can run a lot of that Linux VM inside there. You can run Plex Media Server. I'm really looking forward to doing the tests on that. You can run their whole Office suite of applications, from email to communication, as well as support internally of Microsoft 365 applications as well. And by that, what I mean is you can open Microsoft Word, Sheets, PTX files. All of those can be opened from within the browser on this system with that Microsoft plugin, which doesn't cost anything. On top of that, you've got the likes of the backup and synchronization tools. You have got the Hybrid Backup Sync 3 that allows you to back up and create your perfect 3-to-1 backup strategy there. You've got support of synchronization tools such as synchronization with SaaS tools, software as a service such as Office 365 and Google Workspace, with BoxSafe on this, as well as hybrid storage as well, that allows you to not only bolt on your cloud storage areas and make them appear localized for the QNAP to be able to, synchronize, index, and utilize, but also the reverse by using virtual JBOD that allows you to use areas of storage on this to be bolted on other areas there, and that goes for remote cloud and localized. You've got support of iSCSI services and so that's iSCSI targets and LUNs very easily with this for your business storage and applications that don't really want to work with network addresses, but do want and are happy to work with storage on a NAS that has the localized appearance that iSCSI brings there. There's a tremendous range of apps and services there, and ultimately I like what this can do for both the price point and the hardware architecture inside, while still maintaining a more affordable point than the prosumer grade option up the top. So let's conclude. That was the review of the TS-453E. Again, what did I like? I love that CPU, new generation Celeron there. I like the 8GB of memory. I like the 2.5 GBE. I like the M2 NVMe slots. I like the USB. I like the extra camera licenses, the 3 years of warranty included. The fact I could have expanded this with the 2, the 4, the 8 and the 12 bay expansion devices there. Again, supports the latest hard drives. There's a lot to be said for it. What do I not like? I really don't like that it doesn't include those M2 SSD heatsinks there. I don't understand why. Still not a fan of the chassis, to be perfectly frank. I don't like that I can't upgrade the memory. So I'm a little bit niggled by the PCIe bandwidth of those M2s, but again, it's not the end of the world. The lack of PCIe, although I'm not going to really list that as a neg. I understand why users would want the ability to add things like 10 gigabit Ethernet later on, but again, that's why you would go for the larger one. And the big one there, of course, a lot of users are still burnt by Deadbolt, of course, that whole business of QNAP being hit by the Deadbolt ransomware and its re-emergence every 1 to 2 months because systems are not updated to the latest firmware, and ransomware and the group behind the Deadbolt will continue to attack that same vulnerability that's in the old firmware that people are not updating from there. But we're hopefully moving past this, and QNAP have learnt their lesson, but we'll have to wait and see. But that has been my full review of the 453E. I hope you have enjoyed it. Let me know what you think in the comments. I personally am quite impressed by this device. I'll be interested to see how that price point plays out across the world right now, because I still believe that Amazon price seems a little higher and a bit closer to maybe an RRP than many would like. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Click like if you've enjoyed the video. Click subscribe if you want to learn more. Use the free advice section over on NAS Compares if you still aren't sure what you need, and me and Eddie will answer your questions. You can either message us directly there, or it links to the Ask NAS Compare forum where the community can be more helpful to you as well. And there are links to buy this in the description, which if you were looking to buy it anyway, or if this video has helped you choose whether you want to buy it, please use those links. It helps keep this channel and further videos alive, and really helps us out. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.